Добрый день, дорогие коллеги, и мы продолжаем 27-е банное чтение, тема которых антропология насилия. Тема сегодняшней секции «Война и насилие».
Theme is war and violence. And if yesterday we spoke about how state appropriates the right to violence and tries to present some of its forms as legitimate, today we continue in a way this theme, because war is one of the most manifest forms where which the state tries to present as legitimate, and there is a great range of questions here, and how the memories can be constructed about this traumatic experience, how in general the interesting and unsayable experience can be transmitted into speech. That's what we're going to be touching a lot today. And of course, some broader questions, the questions how the discourse about war is penetrating the official languages, what such notions as economic warfare, economic violence mean, informational warfare, and which forms, which notions such forms presuppose. And I'm glad to introduce our first speaker, Arseniy Kumankov. It's the Professor of Philosophy and Culture and Faculty of Humanities of European University. War 2.0, the conflict in the cyber era. Good day, dear colleagues. I'm glad to. I want to start with a preamble, with a prologue, because with a certain surprise, I found out after seeing the program that I'm the only one to speak about the modern warfare, because everybody else will be talking about the way war was and how it was theorized in the Soviet epoch. And I think it was a shock for me, because I myself started to concentrate on the theory of Soviet theory of war, and I would be gladly talking today about it. But what can we do? This is. But my speech today is about, my talk today is about this contemporary theory of war, and unfortunately, I could not add my voice to the theoretization of Soviet era and Soviet practices of the Soviet times, as everybody else would be doing. As this speech, I might talk. I will be talking how media and war are influencing each other, and what will be the aftermaths of military and the fixation on the media agenda, and how mediatization of war, what impacts it has, and the actual recruiting for its of media for its execution. And what I want to show how when the contemporary media, every user of the media content can intensify his participation in the conflict and turn from the detached observer into the actual complex of what is being done. But I'm just saying this, the word media I would be using in a narrow sense. It is this, its meaning is the mass media, the news, and also the new media. It's just as a part of the mass informational media. And what I want to also to say that I would like to say that this speech is based on my text, which I was planning for the war issue of Logos magazine. but they made the decision not to take this and replace it with another text of mine. But I think that Yegor Sokolov but should actually know my initial text because he's one of the editors of that war issue of Logos magazine. The function of mass media today in the warfare, one of the functions is that they just traditionally share the information, but even in such form, they can show evident impact on the development of the conflict, the participants of which are interested in the creation of self-image as a humanitarian operation, the necessary operations, just war. There is a just cause to it that is led without turning to excessive violence, at least to the population. Besides that, this more contemporary tendency which we can see today, there is a delegitimation of war, and so that is why it's added the task of the war being necessary, unwilling practice, or just to interpret the war campaign, but to interpret as a non-military action, a police action, a counter-terrorist action. And quite often the solving of these tasks and for media, and it becomes the fixed main topic for media, and changing this riverbed, the media become totally mobilized themselves, and they mobilize the traditionally peaceful peaceful sections of media. For example, one can adduce the examples of federal Russian TV channels. I will just adduce several examples to that. For example, in 2015, Russia 24 for the whole year diverged from its normal weather broadcasts and added the dynamics of the day temperature and possibility of the rainfall and all the climatic particularities on the water front, on the war front, at the war front. And you can see January 2015, you can see it on the slide. The journalist told, spoke not only about the temperature and the wind, but also they spoke how it would be difficult for the surrounded army force of the Ukrainians. Their conditions will be worsened by the storm and the rain and the fogs. And it will be the additional factor for demoralization and additional exhaustion of the Ukrainian soldiers that are on the alien territory, as it was put, surrounded. And in June, a bit later, at the east of the Ukraine, they spoke that they have meteorological war because the Ukraine stopped publishing the meteor data at the front, and the concealing of this data was explained by the military reasons, by the war reasons, because during the military operations we don't reveal this information. But they also said that they are violating Russia because the concealment of information has a bad impact for meteor stations on the territory of Russia. For example, it can influence the work of airports. And finally, another example, my favorite example from 2015, when they started Russia's operation in Syria. There was a program which was where the broadcast was saying that it was a good time on behalf of the weather chosen. It was just a weather broadcast in the ordinary news program. On the one hand, we learn something about temperature in Syria and what winds are blowing in Syria. Sorry. But also the hosts informs that it is such a good timing because it's very dry. There are no winds. And so every time when we're watching the weather broadcast, we learn how our guys are there. Is it good? Is it all good to bomb there, the insurgents, terrorists, etc. So media, we can see, become subject to the military needs. And it's a kind of military recruitization of the media. And I think that it is here that we have the key consequence to that the war also becomes mediatized and virtualized. And we can actually be witnesses to the episodes of war, and we turn to their media representations, and we follow the accents the media is on. The media remarks on what is going on, than rather learning what's going on really. The content of the wars is replaced or exhausted by the media, by the media emanation of the conflict, as Luhmann used to write about it. Another aspect which is linked to this militarization of the media is that the media representation of the war is becoming the element of the war itself, even more important and salient than the military actions themselves. There is a famous series of essays of Jean Baudrillard. There was no war in Gulf War. First, it was there is no Gulf War, or there was no war in the Gulf. And I think that Baudrillard there, in the epoch before, preceding the new media, before we started to have new network media and new contents, he fixes that particularity of the military conflicts of today, but also any events of today, not only necessarily the warfare, but we're speaking about war, so it's about war. And he writes that the actions of the concrete people that arm themselves to fight against each other, their successes and their sufferings are serving as a background for their media representation, for it to form its image. And the key importance is the media representation of the event, which can be corrected and transformed and changed according to the political pragmatics. It can be co-opted to the spectacle demand to make it more brighter show rather than the real information about what is going on. And the embodiment of the event acquires its own life and acquires a possibility to influence the events of the real world. And in other words, this media representation has a very indirect relevance to the reality, but it is comfortable. It has a massive character, and it becomes part of reality itself. The image can influence the development of the events. I can adduce several examples, like the campaign at the east of the Ukraine. This is a story of the crucified boy from the town of Slavyansk. You can see this woman on the screen. In 2014, she spoke on many TV channels and news channels. She said that the Ukrainians, as real fascists, they stormed the city. They gathered all people together on the square. They seized the child from one of the mothers and they crucified him on the news board. And they made all the hostages, all the prisoners, watch what was going on. There was no proof of fact of that. Surprisingly, this story, which combines very classical patterns. And I just wanted to say that also she said that the mother was tied to the tank and was taken around the square. And it is a well-known picture. It is a cliched way of description of the fascists in the Soviet villages is now superimposed on the description of the new war. There was no proof of facts to these words, but these stories were translated and spread by the Russian media, and they had very real embodiment, and they influenced the events that were taking place later. Because we have several video proofs how people were speaking and were referring back to that episode, and you can find that on YouTube. And here is one combatant who is saying that from Russia, after he saw how fascists were crucifying the child against the newsboard. And there is another example, because this is a different combatant. He's saying that it was a trigger, Gorlovka village, that a 5-year-old child was crucified and put on square. Here we have a change of location, because in the original story it was Slaviansk and now it's Gorlovka. But I have to note also that Gorlovka has always been under the control of the People's Republic of Donetsk. And the Ukrainian army tried to get it back, but they couldn't. And there was no any information about atrocities. But this man remembers that something like that happened, so some extreme atrocity, and he believes it completely, and that makes him make some actions in real life to interfere and not to allow anything like that to happen in the future. That's how he sees his mission. But here we were speaking about the examples of work for war, of media, but the real change is linked to the arrival of the new media on the scene. The YouTube, just sorry. And there is, they have a range of characteristics that differs them from the traditional media, because it's multiplicity of the sources of information. We have several competing platforms, like traditional state informational media, as well as every private citizen who has a possibility to record his message. And that can become a source of information and of course it has some positive characteristics to that. For example, the impossibility or decrease possibility to conceal some event, some important event. But on the other hand, it doesn't lead to any dispersal of the fog of war Clausewitz used to write about, but it's vice versa, serves makes this fog increase more because of those sources. And the other aspect, I think it's the most important one, is related to the engagement of a person into the conflicts taking place, which he can witness or she can witness with the help of the new media, and how he is engaged and becomes part of them. One of the simplest examples I can draw here, it is the event of 2015 that was reproduced more than once, even today, during the conflict in the conflict of Armenia and Azerbaijan, or Palestine and Israel. We can see the same thing. What happened in 2015? The attacks of Paris, terrorist attacks in Paris. Many people around the world, they immediately paint themselves with their faces with the colors of the French flag. It is a very quick and intensive degree of involvement into the event. It's a group response to the terrorist attack, which has, because the attack is always aimed at terrification of the population, and the population opens the united front that doesn't follow necessarily the concrete geographical locations, but it covers the whole world. Your work study, your kitchen, where you're sitting with your smartphone and with your notebook, it becomes a front, and a million army front. And this is a possibility of media coverage and engagement. These possibilities don't end here. In 2016, a small Kurdian channel translated live the events of the storming of Mosul. It's not the most interesting spectacle. It's a desert. There is some. It's not a Hollywood blockbuster. It's a desert. There are some vehicles, etc. But nevertheless, many big channels, the British channel and Al Jazeera channel, reposted these recordings. You could participate. You could view that, and you can also express your opinion on that in the ways that is traditional for Facebook, like pressing the like button. And Harriet Salling, the British journalist, she paid attention to this episode. She said that we are asked to react to something, to the warfare, to apply some quite improper means, like likes, like when we appreciate the Instagram photos, how I spent my vacation or what I had for breakfast. This media platform is turning into the new field of action, inaccessible to the people of the past, inaccessible to the people who lived before the social networks. But here we're still the witnesses of the event. But the bigger change is shown in other examples. There is a conflict in Syria, this range, and the range of conflicts that grew out of it, the war against the Islamic State. This is an Instagram photo of Iraq Special Forces. What they did, they posted the photos of the seized terrorists of Islamic State, and they asked their subscribers, "What do you want us to do? Put your likes if you want us to kill them, or write that they should not be killed." And then they posted the photographs with the results. That was mainly it was killed. we don't know whether it's a true information, if Iraqi and special forces did it, whether such an organization really exists that has this channel, if really they were capturing the terrorists. There was a criticism here. People were saying that some photos were published before. We don't know if the executions really took place, but in any case, we can see how war penetrates media. And we can see how it becomes how dependent on media. And they actually asked to make as much reports as possible. And there's a marketing technology used, and it is accessible for the war now. Finding yourself in any place on the globe, being just a user of this or that social network, you can influence the development of the conflict. Here we can actually say that there could be a possibility that we would have such a development that the real special forces would be doing such things on the social networking. And on the other hand, what we have to pay attention to as well, that some of the acts of war start to intensively show themselves dependent upon the format of the platforms they are demonstrated at, upon the rules of the networking platforms. They apply them to themselves. The combatants of the Muslim Islamic State, they manifested the executions in the way as to censor the actual slaughtering of the hostages because of the rule of against violence, and just showing a preamble before, some post before that, and what happened after, so that the host, the platform, wouldn't see the information as too violent. So they had to cut out the actual execution, so they won't be banned. Because the initial videos were banned, which contained actually the executions, they were banned quickly. But also we can introduce the examples of the Islamic states. They published the magazine Dabik, that was published as every other glossy fashion or travel magazine would be published, but it was in fact a recruiting and propaganda means. But in terms of its own format, it was ideally printed. It's a highly qualitative gloss, beautiful photography with a good level of text, perhaps even more complicated texts that were used in a kind of not very standard way to serve the tasks that never asked, that never were used in such formats. And so making the summary and what should we actually pay attention to when we're speaking about mediatization of war, we should see that war starts feeling itself dependent on how it is being presented in the mass media, in the new media. It shows a dependence on the formats and rules of the media platforms. And on the other hand, which is no less important, that media themselves become dependent on the fact that the warfare becomes accessible to anyone who has the technical means, not very complicated, like telephones, or like mobile phones, or PC computers. And of course, such transformations of the war and media seem to be quite serious. And I think the main conclusion that we should draw as to see the relation between war and media, that the media are now transformed from the coverage of the war events. It becomes the specific environment where the war is taking place, and it's an ambivalent relations. And because the new media also influence the change of modern war and our perception of the war, we are losing the distance from the war. We become the online participants of the military conflicts. As Jean Baudrillard, whom I mentioned today, said that some operations of the Gulf War were shown at the good prime of TV, because they were, for example, using nighttime to make a better effect of the bright fire against the black sky. And perhaps the new wars would be also pursuing the task of getting more likes. Thank you. Thank you, Arseniy, especially for accentuating the contemporary war and returning back to the contemporary. Dear colleagues, do you have any commentaries? I'm addressing first of all the participants of the conference, but also our viewers on the YouTube. You can be posting your questions on chat in the commentaries. Does anybody have any formulations, anything to say? This is a commentary by Mikhail Davidenko about his personal experience. We had hazing in our division, and the only way we had to deal with it, we had to write about it, but nobody wrote the truth, because there are spheres of silencing in media. Probably you can comment on that. Of course, we can say here about some particularities of how media are working in different societies. We need more information, of course, to fully comment upon this. Why we are not telling the truth and messaging the truth? Because we know that nobody needs the truth, won't be translated, or because we're afraid of the consequences for ourselves. And I think this is the question concerning not only media, but how these social institutes are tuned, how the society sees the problems of the hazing, for example. Who is responsible? When these or other events are taking place in different military divisions and battalions, but related to some tragic events like murders. And for example, the events when somebody who was bullied a lot is responsible for killing, who would be responsible? In our country, it is unambiguous. The question is, it's unambiguous, the person who committed the crime. And so the investigations don't go too far. And the system of perception of hazing works in such a way that we don't feel comfortable to accepting our victim status. There is a question of Irina Dmitrievna. Thank you so much for your interesting talk. Probably I missed something. What you're describing as a state media, or the media in the hands of terrorists, is there anything new here? We know from olden times, from the Second World War and even First World War, these were the same methods. Of course, they were sending the correspondents to the front line. They found real or imaginary heroes, and then that picture was spread all over newspapers and radio. The problem of heroization of war, that's how it worked. They worked for the old and traditional media, the posters, the agitations, etc. What these new technologies are giving us? Because everything is, whatever you are describing is more or less well-working principles that were working forever, for mobilization of people, telling horrible stories and crimes of the opponent, of the adversary. The new media, what is the principally new character?
Конечно, да. Мне кажется,
yes, of course. That we, of course, we can see that in new media, they're keeping the methods, age-old methods, we can say, for mobilization of people, ideological methods. But I think there are several distinctions that are brought by the new media. First, the simultaneous, the possibility of getting information from different sides, from different camps, presenting different sides of the conflicts. That's what we could do in the course of the Ukrainian conflicts and Syrian conflicts. We could see that what every side of the conflict was thinking, how they explained it, how they explained the same events. And besides whatever traditional coverage we had, we just had traditionally we had the just general agenda, presenting our own side. Or perhaps we had a little bit more complicated situation, but we could have different channels that were competing each other, and they could cover differently the same conflict, like in Russia in the 1990s, like, for example, the first Chechen campaign. But here, in the 1990s, we still didn't get much information. There was no much content from the Chechen side. Every participant could produce, now can produce his content. And we have the possibility to get the multiple interpretation of the same event. And another aspect to it, what I wanted to talk about was the intensity of participation. We could miss a lot if we just had only the traditional 19th or 20th century media. We just had it had to be a coincidence that the will of the editor and the will of the government coincided, and that we would get some information of what is going on Philippines, or say in South Africa in Anglo-Boerish War. But now we can get a lot of information very quickly, and also we can react to this information, not in the sense that we would get a feeling or attitude towards what's happening, but that we can participate. Facebook is allowing us to do this, or Iraq Special Forces, as they suggested us, to give our voice, to subscribe and decide life or death. I think that traditional media were not allowing us, and we're not giving us such possibilities. But from your point of view, this possibility to get more information and different information, and on the other hand, this new media that are spreading official information to a great extent. Do you think that this new media help serve these purposes of bigger mobilization or vice versa? One cannot give an unambiguous answer, only one answer to this. We will always be talking about concrete societies and the already formed cliched and partners of perception of the war and non-participants in the war. I was deducing the example that some people saw the TV program about the crucified boy, and they just in their slippers moved immediately to fight to the front line. But it is a marginal. It's not the majority. It's a minority, of course. I wouldn't want to estimate the new media to give some unifying answer to the question. We just can fixate simply that we have some new sphere of perception and participants in the conflict and how it acts, how it works, but it depends on many circumstances. I would, as a moderator and a commentary, I would like to add about it's about the difference between new and old media. Is there any sense in saying that the olden media were more collective, and now it is more individualized, and probably you wanted to see as to how a private person with his individual experience is engaging into war, and with the new media, he has a possibility to live through this experience and to rework his own traumas. It's a very good commentary. Thank you. I don't have any research that would confirm what you are saying. I would, but still, that is a task that is possible, that can be followed in research. The new media are giving us a right to say something, a right to vote. On the level of reactions and likes, we can express our attitudes to what is going on, and this gives us a way to try and understand what we really think about what is going on. And traditional media, we were switching on the radio and heard the voice of Levitan, the big famous broadcaster during the Second World War. But I think we're just listening and nothing happened. But we didn't have any consequence to it. New media give us a possibility to evaluate, to express, to start the polemics with our online opponents, and perhaps then take gun into the hands. Fyodor Nikolai has a question. Thank you so much, Arseniy, for your interesting talk. This is a continuation. I wanted to specify the tactics you were mentioning, the tactic of mobilization and participants, or the state channels that are using the new media for presentation of the conflicts. But the population or the victims, what are the tactics of their self-representations? Are they different? But do you think that this is mobilization, but in a different way? Thank you, Fyodor. I'm glad to see you. Of course, because of my time limitations, I couldn't just say, of course, these tactics can be very different. What Olga was saying, there can be tactics of living, of emotional experience, but they can lead. But such emotions can lead to the stories, of course, of the crucified boy. It is also a form of the reaction to the war, the reaction that translates itself in such an image. I don't have any special research here, but of course, that one should turn to this side of the warfare to try to compare as to how different subjects participating in the conflicts are acting.
Последний вопрос зачитаю.
The last question I would read from chat, YouTube, from Mikhail Davidenko. Whether we have internet limitations because of such particularities of the new war. Of course, who would be limiting? The state, you mean? This is again the question of every concrete state. Yes, and it is possible if the conflict is such that the population of the given state would be very negative, would express negative emotions towards the conflict. Of course, they would have this would lead to some actions on behalf of the state. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you,